Whew. Hi there. This is Noveljutsu, and I'm your host, Raelyn. Welcome to part 2 of our discussion on how to develop new animal species for your novels or role-playing campaigns. Last time we discussed the more physical aspects of your animal species, its anatomy, biological cycle, diet, and so on. This time we're going to take a look at your animal's social and behavioral traits. The same disclaimers from the last video apply to this one, namely, this is not the be-all end-all video to prepare you for inventing new animal species for your world. It's merely meant to get you started on your journey. It's up to you to decide how far your journey of research needs to go before you're ready to tell the story that you want to tell. Second, as usual, we're mainly looking at how animal life on Earth functions. If you're wanting to create fictional animals to inhabit a world that is unlike Earth, take whatever inspiration you need from this video and adapt it to suit the needs of your world and story. Now let's get right into part 2 of developing your animal species. Perhaps one of the most fascinating but underutilized way to make your animal species feel interesting and unique is its social structure. Unless your animal species reproduces asexually or can fertilize eggs without ever coming in contact with another of its species, living its entire life in solitude, then even more solitary species will have at least some sort of social structure in place that will determine their behavior when interacting with others of their own kind. As with everything else we've covered so far, that species' social structure will have evolved to help them survive and meet the basic needs of the individual and group. Those needs may include such things as meeting nutritional requirements, defense, reproduction, raising offspring, and emotional well-being. Is it easier for your animal to meet those needs while being more solitary? That might be possible if resources are scarce, causing competition, or if the species has reason to be aggressive toward its own kind. Or perhaps it's easier for your animal to meet their needs while being part of a herd, or a family unit, or a colony or hive. If your animal lives in a group, does that unit have a distinct hierarchical structure? What are the roles and privileges assigned to each caste, and what physical or behavioral qualities are attributed to them? Who holds authority in a group? Males, females, the oldest or strongest, the parents, or something else? Does an animal become the leader because they are literally born to lead or chosen from youth? Think of queen bees who are fed a special food while they're in their larval stage, and that allows them to develop into the largest female of the hive and the only one capable of producing more bees. Who looks after babies and young in a group? Who feeds them, protects them? Who's responsible for teaching them survival skills? Often the answer will be the mother, but that isn't always and certainly doesn't have to be the case. When offspring reach maturity, are they welcomed into the group, or do they leave on their own? Or are they forced out of the group with violence? How does any hierarchy affect how your animals obtain food, or who is allowed to eat what and when? Maybe your herbivores have a caste that eats last, keeping an eye out for predators until everyone else has had their fill. For carnivores, maybe only certain members are allowed to hunt with the pack. There are so many variations to consider with an animal's social structure that can make the creatures on your world feel unique, while also potentially providing conflict for your characters to overcome. So think about how your animal's social structure might be best utilized for your story. Apart from your animal's social hierarchy, there are many other places where you might want to consider what constitutes normal behavior for your animal. Think of how your animal displays aggressive behavior. Many species might try to make themselves look bigger, making their fur stick out, spreading their wings, or standing on their hind legs. They might make threatening sounds, a growl, roar, or hiss. Maybe they swat a paw or snap their teeth. Likewise, how does your animal behave when threatened? Do they automatically turn and flee? Do they try to intimidate the aggressor in turn? Do they pretend to be dead? Do they spray their attacker with a nasty smell? Does your animal migrate? Where and why? Are they avoiding harsh winters? Do they follow the migration pattern of the herds they hunt? Are they like salmon that return to spawn in the place where they were born? Also consider what your animal's mating behavior is like. What do they do to attract a mate? How do they treat each other after the act? If you write fantasy or sci-fi, which I'm guessing you do if you've made it this far into a video about designing your own animal species for a story, then you might also want to consider if your animal has any unique magical or biological abilities. If your world has magic, can your animal wield it the way some animals can in Avatar: The Last Airbender? Do you have animals born of elemental magic and that's why your dragons can breathe fire? Or do you sci-fi writers out there go for a slightly more scientific approach and your dragon breathes fire because certain biological processes alter the composition of its breath when it's angry, causing it to exhale combustible gases? Can your animals turn people to stone with a look? Do they have a hypnotic call that acts as a magical lure? In The Wheel of Time, Perrin has an affinity with wolves that allow him to speak with them, through which he learns that wolves communicate with each other across great distances using what's effectively telepathy. If you're feeling creative, there are many ways you can make the animals in your story truly magical and out of this world. If that sounds great for your story, it might be worth your time to think about how your animal might have magic or unique biological abilities. This is something I don't often see utilized in novels, but it can be a relatively easy way to make your world feel larger without necessarily having to put in the work to develop an entirely new ecosystem for every town or city your characters visit. Animals often have other closely related species that share an abundance of traits while being different enough to help you make sure your world feels more diverse. Perhaps there's a horse-like animal in your world that is stocky, curly-coated, and always in shades of brown, where your heroine comes from. But when she visits another country, she finds the animals are sleek and white or black in color, and in another place still, the animals are spotted and the size of an alley cat. Maybe that horse-like animal has another species for a cousin that's better adapted to certain climates and certain labor. You can use these differences to put your characters into sticky, scary, or entertaining situations too. Maybe the rabbits where your hero is from are fluffy, docile creatures, and petting one is considered good luck. What happens when he visits the neighboring country without knowing the rabbits there were specifically bred to be attack rabbits? Tiny details like this can be a wonderful way to make your world feel diverse while conserving both the amount of work you have to do in creating your world as well as how much work you have to do explaining your world to readers. Friendly reminder that there are lots of books out there with animals for main characters, so there's no requirement to have human or human-like species inhabiting your world. But most books out there do. So if your story has humanoids for main characters, I'm just going to refer to them as humans from now on for simplicity, you'll definitely want to consider what their relationship with your animal species might be. Mostly I'm talking about things like how dangerous or useful your animal species are to your human characters and civilizations. First, consider how much interaction humans have with this species, if any at all. What form does that interaction take? There are many forms to choose from, and I came up with just a little list here. Perhaps this animal exists more in story than in reality in your world. Perhaps travelers brought back tales of animals from another land, and those tales got twisted into something strange and unique, securing a place for a half-true, half-imagined creature in legend and lore. Maybe it once lived, but is now extinct on your world, or so rare that anyone who claims to have seen one either won't be believed at all, or will be treated like a hero who's done the impossible. In The Wheel of Time, there is a foretold and controversial hero dubbed the Dragon Reborn. But in the books, the actual Dragon Reborn doesn't even know what a dragon is. While a few relics bearing the image of this creature remain, even its legend has been so lost to time that few would even be able to name it by sight. If you have a mythological creature in your world, how do the people view it? What character or symbolism do they attribute to it? Is it used in bedtime stories to frighten children or to inspire them? Do nations or lords put them on banners? Or is use of its image outlawed or restricted? For a real-world example, let's look at dragons again. In the West, many people associate certain kinds of dragons with Chinese aesthetics. Go to any Chinatown in North America and you're likely to see a lot of dragon imagery, but this display is mostly for tourists. Go to China itself and you might have a harder time finding dragons. This is because the use of dragon imagery, especially golden dragon imagery, imagery in China has sometimes been restricted. It was a symbol of imperial power. At different times in history, it might have been used for high-ranking officials, princes, or even only for the emperor himself. Maybe the human relationship with your animal species is one of a hostile nature. Why is it that they can't get along? Is your animal resistant to domestication? Is it violent, known to carry deadly diseases and pass them on to humans? Is your animal a danger to humans, crops, or livestock? Is it a danger to human property, the way termites might be a problem for someone's house? Or is your animal a pest that people don't want rooting through their trash, pooping on their lawn, or nesting in their boxes of cereal? Or perhaps it's humans who are the pest, encroaching on your animal's territory or reducing its food supply, and the animal retaliates in defense. Whichever the case may be, how do your human civilizations respond to this hostile relationship? Pest control? Incentivizing hunters? Building fences or laying traps? Consider not only how what humans do to deal with these animals will affect those animals, but also how it might affect the ecosystem as a whole, as well as how it might affect the humans themselves. Laying traps, for instance, might be a great way to keep those animals out of town, but they could be dangerous to people too. Does the doctor or healer in town constantly have to help people who've gotten caught in a trap? Can those people fully recover, or are those injuries serious and permanent? If so, and especially if these injuries are common, how does the town justify the need for these traps? How do they respond to the dwindling of an able-bodied workforce? Speaking of a workforce, is your animal species domesticated and used for labor? There are many ways an animal might labor for a human cause. It could be a beast of burden, carrying people or supplies along roads, pulling a farmer's plow, or hauling coal through a mine. It could be a guard animal, protecting homes, livestock, or people. More than that, your animal could be a warrior, trained to kill enemy soldiers in battle. You could have animals trained to help humans with the work of their day-to-day lives. Perhaps your animal herds livestock, or maybe it's even trained to feed and care for livestock so your humans can sleep in each morning. Your animal might be trained for hunting, search and rescue, sniffing out dangerous or illegal substances, and more. In a fantasy novel, you could have animals trained to recognize magic users, which would be a trial for your main character if they're a magic user and magic is illegal. Or if magic is perfectly legal, maybe your animal is instead a familiar that helps your wizard learn magic faster or utilize certain spells they wouldn't be able to do on their own. Or perhaps it's the animal that does the magic itself, and the human simply gives orders on when and how the animal uses its magic. Another thing you might want to consider is whether people in your world with disabilities have access to service animals. How might your animal be of use to someone with limited mobility, hearing, sight, or someone who might be prone to meltdowns or anxiety attacks? In science fiction stories, you might prefer to aid disabled characters through technology, but if you're creating new sentient races, that also opens up questions of what might constitute a disability among a race that communicates through dreams, or a race that absorbs all its nutrition through the skin. Is any attempt made to help these people? Is it done through technology, or can your animal species be of help? Another common relationship humans have with animals is one of resource extraction. Is your animal one that people eat or feed to their livestock? If so, is it an animal they have to hunt or one they raise? How do they make sure the population of that animal is kept high enough to support them getting part of their diet from that animal? If they hunt the animal, how does population control of that animal affect local ecosystems? If they raise the animal, how does keeping the population of this animal high affect the economy? Does it have any negative impact on the quality of life of wildlife or people who live near where these animals are raised or slaughtered? Perhaps instead your animal is one humans get other resources from, such as milk, wool, feathers, or perhaps a few drops of venom for a potion your witch is concocting. Perhaps its hair is used for making brushes, its feathers for plumes on a fancy helmet, or its tusks carved into knives, ground into glue, or whittled into pretty figurines. Do your humans obtain these resources ethically and sustainably? If your humans use the animal's milk, what happens to the baby animals that don't get that milk? How often can your humans safely trim your animal's hair to knit a new sweater? Does that animal's hair have special properties that make its hair highly sought after? If your animal has medicinal or arcane uses, is its use regulated or restricted in any way? Are only healers allowed to possess bone powder from your animal? How easy is it for someone else to get their hands on it? Is your animal rare and these ingredients difficult to find? Perhaps your animal isn't your hero's beast of burden, side of steak, or his favorite wool sweater. Maybe instead it's his best friend, providing companionship during a voyage across the stars or a long, arduous journey through a cursed land. What sort of personality does the animal have? How does your hero look after it and keep it fed? How do they play together or bond? Does your animal obey his every command, or does it have a mind of its own? What kind of laws do your people have regarding pet ownership? What behavior is and isn't allowed? Do people in your world respect the physical and emotional health of their pets? Are pets protected by law? Is pet ownership regulated by law? Can just anyone go to the pet store and purchase one of your animals, or do they have to pass a course, earn a certificate, and have a home inspection first? What happens to people who break any laws regarding pet care and ownership? Another type of relationship I came up with that your animal might have with any humans is one of entertainment. This is the category for your circus animals, TV stars, racehorses, dogfights, and so on. What forms of animal entertainment exist on your world? Do the animals enjoy these activities too, or is it purely for the entertainment of people? Are these activities dangerous? What protections are there for the animals? What risks? Which brings us to... This is the final type of relationship I came up with, though it's one that can be found alongside pretty much any other form of human-animal relationship. Unfortunately, once any concept of human ownership or superiority over animals exists, as long as someone can simply pick up any pet they want at a pet store with minimal regulation or use animals to make a profit, some animals will be subject to abuse and poor health and living conditions. Irresponsible breeders, people who buy kittens for Christmas presents then drop them off at a shelter or by the side of the road once those kittens grow up. Hunters who take their dogs hunting but otherwise neglect them. People who feed their animals unhealthy food because it's cheaper. Crowded living conditions. Dog fights. Circuses. Poaching. Being overworked. Dangerous sports and gambling. Do the people in your world care about the well-being of the animals around them? Do they have regulations in place to protect animals? How are those regulations enforced? Are there certain animals they protect but others they don't? How do they justify protesting the slaughter of horses or eating a dog when they don't think twice about the hamburger they're stuffing into their face? What animals do they view as worth protecting? Do different views on animals cause tension between cultures? So those are 7 categories for which your human-animal relationship might fall into. But I should also note that an animal can fall into more than one category. Your animal might be your heroine's beast of burden and her trustworthy companion, with whom she shares all her joys and fears on her journey. For a video game example, look at my sweet boy Kage from Ghost of Tsushima. My Kage is not only a beast of burden and warhorse, but also one of Sakai Dono's closest companions while he's out on missions. The friendship between Sakai and his horse was a lovely gem in this game that added a lot to the story and gameplay experience. And the animals in your world can do the same for your characters and story. Going off of what I developed for Project Noveljutsu's Flora in a previous video, I thought I'd develop a little animal that could have a symbiotic relationship with my healing herb. There are 2 main things that I want to keep in mind as I figure out this little guy. First, since those healing herbs I designed are found near water, my little animal is going to need to be adapted in some way or another to living in or close to a water environment. Second, since that herb also has poisonous numbing effects, my critter is going to need a way to avoid getting poisoned. So this is what I developed. I decided this little guy is going to use my poisonous herb as protection from larger animals, most of which will have learned to avoid going near this nasty plant by the time they're old enough to be any real threat to my animal. My animal will be readily found wherever this plant grows in abundance, sleeping, eating, and making their homes in patches of this plant where they will be protected. To avoid getting poisoned, my animal shouldn't have any sensitive skin that could be easily harmed by the plant. Instead, it should be covered by a thick, tough, armor-like skin that will protect it from absorbing the plant's poison. Vulnerable body parts like ears and nostrils should also be smaller to make them less likely to come in contact with the plant. Since I've decided that it will spend time hunting underwater, it'll need larger eyes adapted to seeking food in lower light levels, but those eyes still need to be protected from the poisonous plants around its home. So I'm giving this little guy a protective brow to keep leaves away from sensitive eyes. Rather than being covered in hair, that thick, tough skin that covers the animal will also help it move more easily through the water by which it lives. I am also giving it some webbed feet, since I imagine it spends time in the water obtaining food. I've decided that it dives to eat aquatic plants, as well as the fish eggs it finds among them, so I'm giving it a long face and body that will help it dive more easily, as well as teeth that will be good for scooping up eggs and snapping off leaves. I've also decided that, kind of like a pelican, it will have a little pouch where it stuffs eggs and leaves before carrying them back home to grind up and eat. There is so much to think about when it comes to creating an animal, so the challenge for this video will just be to work on one animal. If you're already putting together a world of your own, then even if you don't end up using this animal in your story, come up with one animal that would fit well into an ecosystem in your world. Figure out a few things about your animal's diet, life cycle, behaviors, and how it defends itself. If you haven't been building a world of your own yet, instead, try taking an animal from Earth and change something about its anatomy. Dogs all now have 6 eyes. Ants are a foot tall. All rabbits are attack rabbits. Now try to figure out why that animal might have evolved that way. How would that evolution affect other areas of that animal's anatomy or behavior? If your rabbits are attack rabbits with fangs, are they carnivores? How does being a carnivore affect everything else about their existence? You don't have to go through every category that I've listed and answer every question that I've posed in this video. Just spend some time considering the basics of how your animal might exist within its habitat and how it would adapt to get nutrition and defend itself from danger. That's it for this episode. We covered a lot today, so I hope some of the questions I raised will get you thinking about how you can make the animals in your world serve your story better or in more interesting ways. Have you read a book that has a really fascinating animal? What is it? What do you find interesting? Does it have a really cool social structure? Did it work really well in that novel somehow? If you found this video helpful, go ahead and give it a like, share, subscribe if you are so inclined. You know the drill. All the links to my social media are in the description box below, and I will see you next time.